So the title of my presentation today is called Movement Towards a One Planet Future. It's a really broad topic, and I'm going to wander around a little bit today and kind of follow the three general questions. So first, just giving a little background on where we are at now with the idea of humanity and nature. A little bit of quantitative evidence from some of the studies we've done and a forthcoming paper, and give some examples of who's doing what in the world. So first, a little, I guess, personal anecdote and story about context, about humanity and nature. This beautiful scene happens to be Slovenia. We've been working with the national government there for about 4 years. And at the end of one of my trips over there, they took me around and they showed me how proud of they were of their ecological heritage. They had a major exhibit in the middle of Ljubljana, their capital city, and it explained a lot of different things about their tradition and their heritage of humanity and nature. So they showed me how they used to have the people living in traditional houses on the mountains, and they knew how fast the forest was growing. They knew which trees to cut down by knocking on them and listening to them. And they knew about sustainable management of their resources. They showed me examples of how they would reuse the water and then reuse the water that they cooked with to then clean their clothes later in the day. Things like that. This is not a, I think, are we still on? I think we're still on there. All right. This isn't something unique to the culture of Slovenia, although they're very proud of it. But we've always had a relationship between humanity and nature, whether it was the native peoples living on any lands as they did before, hunter-gatherers, or moving forward, till today, we still have a relationship with nature. There are people who live in close contact with nature and actually produce the things that they consume. So this idea of the concepts behind ecological accounting are not new. They're very basic and primal in nature in some ways. The idea of living off the land. But today, it's just a little different. Production and consumption are separated by the global supply chain, as we know, and there's different actors who are competing on extremely tight profit margins to deliver to us what we demand at the cheapest possible cost. This is our current optimized society. On the other hand, we do have land managers, we have forest management. We have these things in modern day society, and it's just different than before. Here's the 2021 update. We've always known that this relationship exists, but it's now just being really recognized globally on a more popular level. So just this year and just in the last month, I think, we've seen a major report come out, The Economics of Biodiversity, the Dasgupta Review. And they talk extensively about this. Our economies, livelihoods, and well-being all depend on our most precious asset, nature. Our demands far exceed our capacity to supply us. The solution starts with understanding and accepting a simple truth. Our economies are embedded within nature, not external to it. We've known this, but it's now coming out on the world stage a little bit more. The most recent report, Making Peace with Nature, coming out of UNEP. Earth's interrelated environmental emergencies must be addressed together. The interconnected nature of climate change, loss of biodiversity, land degradation, various elements of pollution means they must be addressed together to maximize the benefits and minimize the trade-offs. So here's where we stand today. Moving on, what does it look like in terms of what we see from our data, and what does it mean for the future? After that background from what Eric gave us, in this chart, you can see a timeline of how our supply to demand ratio has changed over time. So those countries in red in this figure are actually countries who consume more than their country's biocapacity. So they have to import goods. As you can see over time, there are more and more net consumers or net importers. And that's just not a sustainable path for the future. It is mathematically impossible to continue on this path. This chart takes that just a little step further, and it's a bit heavy, so I'm going to explain it. On the x-axis, you have per capita income. So we're looking at resource distributions here, and each dot or each flag is a country. And on the left side of that blue bar, you have countries that exist whose per capita income is less than world average. On the right side of the chart, you have countries whose per capita income is greater than world average. This matters because if we live in a world of limited resources, we all compete for the same resources. So those on the right have more purchasing power to purchase resources. From top to bottom, you can see the middle axis determines their resource consumption to resource supply ratio. So on the top half, you have countries who live, you have populations who live in a biocapacity reserve. Canada, for example, consumes far less than its environment can produce by way of pure biocapacity. On the other hand, you might have countries like the UAE or Qatar on the bottom who have high footprints, but their countries do not have a lot of biocapacity. So what does this actually mean? Well, you have countries or populations on the top right who both have income to purchase resources and have natural resources within their own countries. You have countries on the bottom right quadrant who have high income to purchase resources, but do not have a lot of biocapacity. You have countries on the top left who have a surplus of resources, but do not have a lot of income. And you have countries on the bottom left who have a deficit in biocapacity and lower than average income. So they are challenged, resource challenged doubly. And what does it look like? 7% of the population, or 14%, has a biocapacity reserve, and that's split half and half between high income and low income populations. And in terms of biocapacity deficits, you see there's a number of countries who have a high income and live in a biocapacity deficit, but 71% of the world's population actually lives in a country whose natural resources do not support their level of consumption, and their income is lower than world average. What does this mean moving forward? That bringing these countries to a state of better development is going to be a major challenge for the world. So this is actually in press, should be coming out in Nature Sustainability in the coming weeks or month, we expect. What does this mean in terms of the path forward and achieving the idea of sustainable development? As Eric presented a little bit earlier, this chart shows the ecological footprint on the right in terms of normalized to number of Earths. And there's a green line in the middle that shows world average biocapacity at 1 Earth. So we need to be below that to be in terms of sustainable resource use. And on the x-axis, we have the Human Development Index. And this indicates, this is the UN's version of how well people are living. So the two kind of segments indicate what the UN considers high human development and very high human development. So this indicator is a mix of longevity, education, and income. So when you look at those two, we have what we call the Global Sustainable Development Quadrant on the right, which is where we want to get. While this is a snapshot of 2017, it's actually really interesting because the shape of the curve actually demonstrates the traditional path of development, which does come at a high ecological cost. As you improve the human development of a population, so that population also consumes greater amount of resources or produce greater amount of waste. That's actually seen as a snapshot of countries in various stages of development here. Where do we want to get? In order to get there, we actually have to start asking really hard questions. And something to pose to everyone listening and watching is, what are the most important questions to ask? Well, you can phrase the question as, how do we optimize our actions for a regenerative economy plus human well-being? That's aligned with those green arrows. How do we get to that quadrant? There is a question that a lot of people ask, and you can ask if this is the most important question. How do we do what we have been doing more efficiently? So I think there's a lot of actors out there in the world who are really struggling with the second question. But the quickest way to get there is really looking at the first question and saying, how do we change our actions to optimize this future? So I'm going to move on a little bit now to give us some examples of who's doing what, and more importantly, who is recognizing the current context that we've just presented and aligning their actions towards that common goal. Of course, there are many more examples in the world, but I'm just going to present a few that we've been working with. So back to Slovenia. We've been working with them for 4 years, but since even before then, the ecological footprint has been incorporated in their national development strategy for 2030. And both the footprint and biocapacity are leading indicators. They've set targets for reduction, and they've implemented a set of reduction measures to get towards this goal in terms of sustainable forest management on the biocapacity side, looking at electrifying, using solar to have a distributed electrical grid, and optimizing the built environment in terms of having long-term reduction of ecological footprint. Not only are they implementing these goals at the national level, but the framework's been extended down to the regional level as well. In Japan, we've been engaging the ecological footprint in the national government for almost 2 decades. And there's a lot of text in this figure, but I'll give the gist here and a short story. In 1996 was the first introduction of the ecological footprint and results to the Ministry of Environment. That report was welcomed. They agreed and they liked the report, they liked the concept, but at the time, presentation and publicity of it was just not possible. It was not something they could accept publicly. After years of engagement with NGOs, with academia, various businesses, we are now having deeper engagement with the national government and municipal governments in Japan towards the goal of one planet. So things have changed a lot over time. We've recently, in the last few years, started working with a number of Portuguese municipalities for monitoring, managing, and setting success criteria by ecological footprint and biocapacity. There are multiple facets of engagement through the municipal government, with partner NGOs, with academia, and with civil society. In 2017, we piloted this study with 6 cities. In 2019, 12 additional cities joined the project. And in 2021, This is just recent news. An additional 25 cities, bringing us to a total of 43, are now part of this project. And it involves individual engagement through specific footprint calculators, but it also has a strong focus on biocapacity management that is engaging both academia and the municipal governments. Along with this, there's a strong interest in food in Portugal. It's a big part of their culture. So there's parallel academic research being done on this front. With those few examples, I'm going to say thank you. Leave you with a few resources if you wanted to read more about those studies or see any recent journal articles or investigate the data a little bit more. Thank you, and I'll hand it back to Eric or Mark.